So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another episode of Backroads Arizona. In this video, I'm going to show you how I bypassed the fact that you have to step on the brake in order to crank the engine over on my 2020 Turbo Velocity XP 1000 RZR. Now you might be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And the answer is very simple. The RZR has left me stranded twice out riding because the engine would not crank over because the brake switch failed. Now, the first time this happened, I was actually in the vehicle and I actually jumped the starter with my jumper box in order to get it to start. The second time this happened to me, my family and I were actually in Sedona, Arizona riding, and I was going downhill in front of them with my mountain bike when the RZR did not start. I had made it all the way down this hill by the time they got in contact with me to tell me it would not start. I tried making it back up to them. I could not do that. Luckily enough, they were on a downhill slope. So I actually got them to push the RZR to get it started rolling down that hill, and they rolled all the way down to where I was at. Where I was able to get into my just-in-case box, find a little piece of wire, and bypass the brake switch in order to get it started. Now, the brake switch I purchased off of Amazon said it would fit everything from a 2016 to a 2021. So my assumption is if you have any of those model years, what I'm doing in this video should work on those years as well, although that is not an absolute certainty because this is the only one I've actually done this to. Now, I do want you to keep in mind this video is basically helping you with a no crank, not a no start. And what I mean by that is you're holding the key in the crank position, but the engine is not turning over. If when you go to turn the ignition to crank, the engine is turning over, but it's just not starting, that is a completely different set of issues that is not covered in this video. Now, the original Polaris brake switch did last me about 3 years, and there will be an icon to when I actually replace that brake switch at the end of this video if you need to check that out. So at that time, I purchased one off of Amazon, and that one lasted me about a year, which was only a handful of trips. Then I went ahead and replaced that one with a different brand, one I got off of Amazon, and that one lasted the same. So needless to say, I'm getting pretty pissed. Now, I had thought about going and getting an actual Polaris brake switch, but they want over $120, which is absolutely ridiculous. Which I really wouldn't mind spending that kind of money, but it didn't really do that great as far as longevity in the first place. So I decided not to go that route. I got another one off of Amazon. However, I didn't want the possibility of this happening to me again, so I bypassed the crank signal going through the brake switch, so I do not have to step on the brake to start the engine. However, the brake lights still work as they should, and I'm going to show you how I did it. Now, we are Amazon affiliates, and I will put the links to the tools and products that I used in this video in my description if you want to get those coming. And let's get to it. Now, if you are out riding right now and you had this happen to you and this is why you're watching this video, the first thing you're going to want to check is have somebody go behind the vehicle, then turn the key to the on position and step on the brake pedal and have somebody let you know whether the brake lights are coming on the back of the RZR. If the brake lights do come on, then your brake switch is not the problem. However, this video still might help you out. If the brake lights aren't coming on, then you might be able to actually hold the key in the crank position and stomp on that pedal harder than usual several times, and you might get lucky where that switch is going out, but applying that extra pressure to the brake pedal might get it to click over one more time so you can make it back from wherever you're at. Now, if applying that extra force to the brake pedal still doesn't get it to go, I am going to still show you how to bypass that brake switch so you can make it back from wherever you're at. Now, I do want you to keep in mind there are several other things that can cause a Polaris RZR not to crank over. This is just the most common failure that is probably present on these vehicles. You could have a starter that went bad. You could have a relay that went bad. You could have an ignition that went bad. You might have the starter solenoid going out or possibly even a loose ground wire. You could also have a battery that just went dead or was going dead because the charging system failed while you were out riding. So there are several possibilities. I will touch on a couple of these and what you might be able to do to still get you going if one of those other items failed during this video as well. So if you go into the cab, underneath the left-hand side of the steering column is the fuse block, and you're going to have two plastic tabs that you need to squeeze in order to remove that cover from the fuse block. If you flip that cover over, it is labeled telling you what fuses and relays do what for this RZR. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're only going to concentrate on two of these relays, the start relay and the brake relay. Now that start relay is actually the one we're going to be bypassing in order to make it so you don't have to step on the brake in order to crank over the engine. However, we are going to look at the brake relay as well, and the reason for that is something you can hear clicking. If you just turn the key to the on position and listen for that relay when you step on the brake. You can also feel it if you put your hand on it, and this is telling you that that brake relay is good. Right here is the example of that. So if your start relay has gone bad and that's the reason your engine isn't cranking over, you could pull the start relay and the brake relay and switch those two relays in order to get you going. So now I'm going to go over what I did to bypass the brake switch in order to make it so I didn't have to step on the brake in order to start the engine. So what I'm going to do is pull the start relay out of the fuse block. So you'll notice the relay that I pulled out of the fuse block had 4 connection points on it. So I'm going to go over what those 4 connection points are so you have a quick understanding of how a relay works. So here's a quick easy diagram of how they're using this relay for the start circuit. So the first connection point is going to be the 12 volt power coming from the crank on the ignition. And then right across from that is the 12 volts to the exciter on the starter solenoid. However, that connection is not allowed to be made unless you get the signal from the brake switch, which is a 12 volt power. Then you also have to have a ground back to the battery, because in order for anything to trigger and turn something on, it has to have a path to ground to complete the circuit. Basically, a relay is an electronic switch, so when you apply 12 volts to this relay with the ground, it makes this connection, basically transferring this 12 volts through the relay and going to the starter. So in order to bypass this, all we're going to do is connect these two so it does not require this 12 volt signal from the brake switch in order to supply the 12 volts from this side of the relay over to this side. So right here I'm going to show you how I tested these connection points in the fuse block to verify how it was working. Now I did use my power probe in order to do this, which does need a power and a ground hookup. Under the hood, this Razor has a bus bar that has a power and a ground right there. I used the power side, but then just hooked my ground to a bolt that was available because it was easier to get to. Now, obviously, a power probe is a little bit more expensive than other testers you can use to do this, which is a multimeter or a dual polarity test light. They also make knockoff versions of the power probe these days, so you could also go that route and save a little bit of money. Power probe was just the original, to the best of my knowledge, of this type of tester. I will put the links to these other items in my description. So with the start relay removed from the fuse block, I used my power probe to test for power and ground at each one of those connection points. So right here, I am pressing on the brake pedal with my hand. You can hear that brake relay clicking, and I'm testing for power at those connection points to see which one is coming from the brake switch. So the light coming off my power probe made that a little hard to see, but it was the lower left connection point that was getting power every time I stepped on the brake pedal coming from the brake pressure switch. So now I need to figure out what connection point was coming from the ignition switch when you held it in the crank position. So you can hear me turning that ignition to the crank position, and you can see every time you hear that, it is lighting up with 12 volts. And that ended up being the upper left connection point in the fuse block for that relay. Now that relay does need a ground in order for that power to excite it, to basically complete the circuit, and the lower right connection point was that ground. Now, being as though I was using my power probe, I can jump a power to a connection. So right here, I'm putting 12 volts to the remaining connection point, which is the connection point for the wire going to the exciter for the starter solenoid. And right here, you can see the engine starts and cranks as soon as I put that 12 volts to that connection. So basically, all that needed to be done was transfer the upper left connection point to the upper right connection point in order to make it so I would not have to step on the brake in order to crank the engine over. So what I ended up doing is finding a U-shaped wire connector that had the exact same size spade terminals as what was on the relay and the same spacing, and just put it in place of that relay in the top 2 connection points. Then, funny story, as I was editing this video and getting a couple extra pictures, I took another look in that fuse block and realized that the fuses that they were using in that fuse block had the exact same spacing as the relay. So I removed that U-shaped electrical connector and took a 20 amp fuse and put it in there in place of it. Now, I highly recommend doing the testing that I did to make sure that you are jumping the right connection points, because if you happen to put that to the ground and then straight power goes to it, you could melt up your fuse block or possibly burn up a module if you don't do it correctly. Now, obviously that was way more likely when using a U-shaped electrical connector. However, once using the fuse, you added just another form of circuit protection, so it would be far less likely that you would burn something up. So right here you can see that I'm not stepping on the brake and I'm cranking over the engine, which is exactly what I was trying to accomplish, just in case that brake switch fails on me again. And right here you can see that I'm pushing on the brake pedal and the lights are working as they should. Now, even though I bypassed the brake switch, I'm still obviously going to press on the brake while I start the engine for the most part, but I did want to do it without stepping on the brake just to see what would happen. So I put it in reverse, did not step on the brake, and I did start the engine. It did barely lunge just a little bit and then it stopped. The check engine light did go on. However, when I reset, put it in park, stepped on the brake and started it a couple times that way, the check engine light went off. So there's really no safety hazard with not having it. It's not like it's going to go lunging and go driving away on you if you forget to step on the brake. And the reason for that is because it has centrifugal clutches, so you have to have RPMs above idle to go anywhere anyways. So all that was left to do after that was go ahead and snap the fuse block cover back in place. Now, being as though that's the same relay that's used in the rest of that fuse block, and one of those relays is for the fuel pump, I decided to keep that relay and package it away in the glove box in case I need it later for something else. So the other thing that might fail on you is the starter solenoid itself, and it basically works like that smaller relay that we went over. It's just a bigger version of it to handle more amperage. So what you can do is, if that's possibly failing, you pull those red rubber caps away from that and jump that from pole to pole, maybe with a screwdriver or whatever you can get in there, and that might get you cranking as well. When jumping across this, you do need something pretty heavy duty that will handle the amperage, and I would recommend something with a rubber handle or putting gloves on in order to do this as well. So that is going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.